What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the channel. So, as you all know by now, the college football playoff top 4 teams have been released. The matchups are decided and the times are set. Alabama is number 1, Michigan 2, Georgia 3, and Cincinnati is 4, which means that Bama will play Cincy and UGA will face off against Michigan. So, now, to begin with, let's talk about how we got to these 4 teams in the first place. And to be honest, to me, this is one of the easiest selection Sundays we've seen so far, if not the easiest, because there really was no controversy out there about who should be in, despite what some people on Twitter will lead you to believe. And I need to say that because I have seen and heard some ridiculous takes, in particular on Georgia, not deserving to be in the playoff, and that is just an absolutely idiotic argument to make at this point. The only real potential debate that you could have had, in my opinion at least, is the seeding. Who would go where? Is Michigan 1? Is Bama 1? Should Georgia fall to 4? Should they be 3? But any argument to try to say Georgia doesn't deserve to be in because they lost one game and kind of bad optics around it, obviously, but they lost one game, now they shouldn't be in. Who are you going to put in ahead of them? I mean, who? It's not a good argument to me, but that is kind of the whole point of the video. So while I agree with the rankings to, just as a whole, and to me it was pretty obvious that it was either going to be Michigan 1 and Georgia 4 or Michigan 2 and Georgia 3 because they were going to do everything in their power to avoid a semifinal rematch immediately after seeing the same game in the SEC Championship. I mean, they'll say they didn't try to fix it that way, and maybe they didn't, but it kind of seems that way. To me, there's not really much of an interesting argument to be had on Michigan or Bama at 1. Both of them can deserve to be 1. Both of them could be 2. It really doesn't matter. The matchups were going to be the same either way. So, now let's just play some devil's advocate just to see who else you could maybe begin to make an argument for. Just for the sake of it, just to see what's some of the teams out there that didn't make it that maybe people are arguing should be in. So for me, Baylor has the most convincing argument of any of the teams that didn't make it in because they're a 2-loss Big 12 champ. They have wins over Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Like I said, they're a Power 5 conference champ, and they avenged one of their 2 losses against Oklahoma State, which, in my opinion, at least lessens the impact of that loss. If you lose to Oklahoma State, but then you come back later and the second time you beat them, I think that definitely lessens the impact of losing the first time. It doesn't completely negate it, but it does definitely reduce it, at least to some extent. But the real problems in Baylor's resume aren't there. It's not in being the Big 12 champ and losing to Oklahoma State because, like I said, they avenged it. The problem is the TCU loss. No matter how you look at it, there is no way to call this a good loss. I really think there are good losses to begin with, but some losses are definitely better than others. There's no way to call the TCU loss a good loss. TCU is not a good team, and Baylor lost in a game they really should have won, and with it being their second loss, if it was their first loss, then they very realistically still would have had a shot, but being their second loss, it really hurts them because, in my opinion, it really single-handedly costs their shot at the playoffs because if Baylor was a 1-loss champ, there'd be a very real chance that they could jump Cincy or even Georgia after how the SEC title went. Because with that, if they're a 1-loss champ with wins over Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, avenging their only loss, they're a Power 5 conference champion, you could argue that is better than Cincy's 13-0, and you could definitely argue it's better than a same record 12-1 Georgia who didn't win their conference at that point. But the TCU loss really ruins that argument altogether. There's not a good argument to make for a 2-loss Baylor over a 1-loss Georgia who's looked like the better team the whole way. And, with less losses, they lost at the very end. They were the number 1 team. Baylor was, I think, 9 going in. There's no way they're going to jump 9-4 or 9-3 without some other chaos happening. And Georgia, like I said, you could argue they had a tougher schedule, you could argue they had a weaker schedule, but at the very least they're a comparable schedule, so that 2-loss to 1-loss doesn't make up for it. And like I said, I think they also lose the argument against a 13-0 conference champ in Cincinnati, even though they're a G5, mainly due to the Notre Dame win, and the Americans actually a somewhat decent conference, and plus 13-0 versus a 2-loss team, it's just too big of a difference, and all of the media hype around Cincinnati, there was no way they weren't going to put them in. So the TCU loss for me really killed any shot Baylor had. Now, the next team you could argue for is Notre Dame. However, they have 0 ranked wins, and they lost to the only ranked team they played, and they didn't play in a conference championship because they're Notre Dame, and they refused to join a conference. They're still way behind the times with that. It's really hurting them in particular this year. And also, the number 4 team, who they could really make the biggest argument for them to be over, beat them head-to-head. So, but what are you gonna argue? We've seen that. Cincinnati was 11 points better on the field, a 24-13 win. So that really hurts them, not having a conference championship one, not having any ranked wins, and losing to the only ranked team they played, but mainly because it's Cincinnati and where Cincinnati is. That really costs Notre Dame, in my opinion. They also weren't dominant in any of the games they really played until the very end of the season against teams like Georgia Tech and Stanford, who, especially by Power 5 standards, are horrible teams this year. They beat Georgia Tech 55-0. Georgia beat them 45-0. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at that point. Georgia Tech's not good enough to even in a dominant win, to make that look like an impressive resume for them. And I find it really difficult to punish Georgia on the one hand for losing in a conference championship game against a very good, arguably the best team in America right now, Alabama team, when Notre Dame sits home and doesn't even play in one. How do you punish Georgia, who has a better resume across the board, who played in a conference championship against a very good team and just lost? How do you punish them when Notre Dame doesn't even play in one? I don't think you can do that. And you certainly can't put them above Cincy because Cincy beat them head-to-head and has a better record and a better resume. So in my opinion, really, Notre Dame has no argument, even less of an argument than Baylor would have. And then the final team I've heard some argument for is Ohio State. However, they have many of the same problems that Baylor has, and they also don't have a conference championship. The loss to Oregon is really heavy here, as Oregon continues to slide as a team. Oregon loss initially early in the season looked like a fairly good loss. You know, the way they lost wasn't great, with Oregon just running down their throat. But at least it's a very good Oregon team that you lost to, so it doesn't kill you at that point. But then Oregon they lose to Utah by like 31 or something. They struggled through the rest of the season. They then lost to Utah again a second time. I forget the other team. Oregon lost another game to a very bad team. Was it Stanford? I think it was Stanford who upset Oregon. I could be wrong. I should have looked that up before talking about them in particular. But regardless, the point is Oregon is not a very good team at this point, and it's not a very good loss anymore. And that also slides them down to a 2-loss team, very similar to Baylor. The difference is Baylor's a conference champion in the Big 12. Ohio State doesn't even have that. So it's really, really difficult to argue for a 2-loss non-conference champ to get in, especially with a loss to an Oregon team that, again, not a great loss. The Michigan loss is a very good team, but I don't think there was any question after that game that Michigan was by far the better team that day. Now, if they played again, you never know. Ohio State has the potential to just explode offensively on anybody. I mean, they're a very dangerous team no matter what. But they don't have a deserving resume, and they don't have a conference championship. I mean, there's not much of an argument. And again, I think it would be compelling to argue about them versus Notre Dame. I think it's a much more interesting argument to make, but it still doesn't get them into the playoff because Notre Dame's not in either. It's just an argument about should they be at 5 instead of 6. And honestly, I think Baylor should have been above them as a conference champ. Same resume. Well, not same resume, but same record, similar resume. But none of those arguments help you because it still doesn't get them in the playoff. You can't put a 2-loss non-champ over an undefeated champion Cincinnati, and you can't put them over a 12-1 non-champ Georgia, whose only loss is to Alabama and has looked like a super dominant team up until that point. You just can't do it. So really, to me, there's not a good argument to be had for Ohio State. There's not a good argument for Notre Dame. There's really not a good argument for Baylor. It's kind of the whole point of the video. I know it's going to be like the whole, did the committee get it right? But there's not much of a question about if they got the 4 teams right. And I don't think there's much of a question about what the matchups were going to be either. It was either going to be 1 Michigan and 4 Georgia or 2 Michigan and 3 Georgia. with Bama and Cincy playing and Georgia and Michigan playing, they were going to do their best to avoid the Bama Georgia rematch. There was no way Georgia and Cincy were going to meet up. So there was some intrigue there, but really not much. All in all, pretty mild selection Sunday. And so in conclusion, in my opinion, the committee got it right. Like I said, it wasn't even hard this year. There wasn't a good team with a good enough argument to be put in above Georgia or above Cincinnati. I've seen some arguments for Utah, which is a 3-loss team at this point. Come on. Do we really think Utah's more deserving than a 1-loss Georgia? And Cincy, nobody's arguing for them to not be in because they're the media darling at this point. And the only people that are kind of like the stooges, out there on the edges of college football at this point. Do I think Cincy is nearly as good as the other 3 teams in the playoff? No. Does it matter? No, because I think they have a deserving enough resume to get in, and that's what should matter when it comes to getting them into the playoff. So, like I said, I think this will make for a very interesting playoff, despite that there not being much controversy. And I'm going to break down those matchups in a different video later on, and I'm going to do just an initial thoughts and preview thing, and then I'm also going to do later on, closer to the actual game, I'm going to do an actual in-depth breakdown on it. But that'll really do it for this one. I just kind of wanted to give my initial thoughts on the playoff rankings. Like I said, not much controversy in this one, maybe some seeding stuff, but I felt pretty confident in how it was all going to go down. Like I said, going to break down the matchups in the future, and so be on the lookout for that. And like I said, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. Really appreciate the support. Let me know if you think the committee got it right. Leave that down in the comments below if you think the committee got it right and what matchups you're most excited to see in the playoff. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content because I'm going to be making all kinds of college football videos for you guys in the future. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.